Thank you for attending today's Bright Talk on AscentIQ. It's brought to you by Ironside. We are a business analytics consulting company that's been around since 1999, and we're also an AWS partner, an advanced tier partner. AscentIQ is an Ironside service focused in accelerating your migration from Cognos to QuickSight. So in the following 15 minutes, we're going to talk about our framework, our methodology and process for making sure your migration is valuable and successful. Today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about migration pain and anxiety, what to include in your migration plan, some of the accelerators and tools that are built into AscentIQ. My name is Dee Shea. I'm a practice director for business analytics. So we've been doing BI engagements for 20 plus years. We've been doing a lot of migrations over the past few years, and we've chosen to focus on Cognos to QuickSight. On the right side of the screen, you've got our highlights of AscentIQ. It's about the rationalization, documentation and accuracy, and then the automation of development from code to actual BI content. This is our tagline. It's what we believe in, and we try to help our clients use data to make better decisions about their business. So just to note that we have a few different Ascent products. There's 3 Bright Talks, this one included on the right on the AscentIQ side. There's also an Ascent AI and Ascent Data Bright Talk available for download. So we're going to talk about migration anxiety. So if you're here, you're probably looking at what does it mean to do a BI migration from Cognos to QuickSight. The biggest piece about migrations that we found over the past few years is just the anxiety to get started and not knowing if you've got 20 years of legacy content built in a tool and millions of dollars invested in building that content and making sure it's accurate and distributing that content. How do you even get started thinking about what to move? Like, how much of it do you move? Do you move all of it? Do you move half of it? Is the functionality comparable to what you have today? Is it a 6-month project? Is it a 2-year project? Is it a 6-month project, which is super easy? Or is it a 6-month project, which is super painful? And then what do you do with your environment as you are attempting the move, right? And then ultimately, what is the cost? That's the huge driving factor of this. So there's a ton of anxiety in trying to do a huge move like this. And some of the tooling that we've built and the methods that we've created are in an effort to help reduce a little bit of this anxiety and give you a little bit of direction. So what is AscentIQ? We've done so many migrations over the past few years. We tried to break it down to basics and create a migration framework. So the biggest part about this and the best way to relieve some of the stress in doing a migration is to have a really good plan, to know what you're going to do and know how long it's going to take, or at least identify the steps or in the sequence to go through to get there. So we're going to talk about all of these bullet points to some degree in the next few slides. But the first one is really to determine what you have, right? Do you have 20,000 reports or dashboards? Do you have 5,000 or do you have 2,000? And of that amount, how much is useful, right? Is it half of it? Is it a quarter of it? And then what we'll try to do is we'll try to figure out how much of it can you actually remove, how much of it is duplicative. Because if you're going to move 5,000 reports and only half are valuable, then you're going to double your efforts in migration, right? And that's very costly. What we're also going to try to do is figure out how do we document everything and make sure that you're not throwing away stuff when you shut off the old system. And then at least you have all the institutional knowledge that went into creating that content, your legacy content remains. Right. So if you need to go and look something up, look up a formula or an expression that was written 20 years ago, a really complex one that nobody knows today, that it's still there somewhere for safekeeping. We also want to make sure that we can take a look and intelligently map old content to new content with capabilities, right? If you have a capability that was available 10 years ago, but is not available today just because it's outdated, how do we map that? How do we rationalize that effort of moving from old to new? Obviously, we're going to need to figure out a project and resource plan. And then at the end, we're going to figure out costs based on all the effort that we went through up above. A little bit about our migration history. So we've been doing migrations for years. And these are some of the highlights of the migrations that we've done in the past. We've done migrations at fairly large scale. One particular migration was a 25-person team. We were running that team and about 18 hours a day. So we were doing an offshore model where we had people just constantly working almost 24 hours a day. We've done migrations where we've had environments of 140 plus servers. We've done many different kind of old tools to new tools, a lot of them to QuickSight. We've touched everything from OAE, Cognos, Tableau, Power BI, all of these tools. And then a lot of the migrations we do are 4,000 plus reports and dashboards. So that's kind of a little bit of the history of where we came from and why we developed these tools. And here's a more graphic or visual view of this process. So it's a 3-step process, and we actually start at the bottom. Step number 1 is the BCA, or BI content assessment. We're going to do content ingestion. Here's where we're going to take a copy of the content store. What we do on our end with our tooling is we completely break down the content store into its basic building blocks. So we know everything, how many data items and queries there are, how many render variables are, parameters, everything about every single piece of content in your Cognos content store we know about. And we create what's called a rationalization assessment. And then from there, we develop our initial pass on a migration estimate. So you have a rough order of magnitude of what is this thing going to take to move. The second step is optimization. The step is when we actually do the rationalization of that content to say from 20,000 to 5,000 or 3,000 reports that you need. And then we look at the compatibility from old environment to new environment. We talked a little bit about the capabilities from old to new. And then we give you a calibrated migration estimate, meaning instead of 20,000 pieces of content, we know you have exactly 1,775, and it's going to be low complexity to move half of them and high complexity to move the other half, right? So we have a better calibrated estimate of the effort. And then in this step, we also provide what's called a cookbook. And when we talked about documentation, we'll run an engine to develop documentation on every single reporting asset that you have. So this will lay out all the data items in the model and the package, the lineage, the formatting, the colors, the fonts. It will do formatting on the page, everything about that report it documents in a PDF format. So it's readable to an end user or a developer, or if you just want to have it for storage, you can go back later and just think of it as a library of your content. So we run that on every single piece of content so that you don't lose anything. Once we have that, we can go to the third step, which is assembly. We call it assembly. And there's really 3 different flavors of this. We have our assets as code, which is a fully automated content generator. So we take the code from the Cognos side, we run it through this assets as code machine, and it actually creates through an API call the new content on the QuickSight side. So that's fully automated. We have the fully manual side. So if you have something like a queue or some sort of capability in Cognos that doesn't exist in QuickSight, and we have to reimagine it, there's a manual process that our BI developers go through, and then we rebuild it or reimagine it in QuickSight, and that's the fully manual. And then you have everything that's kind of in between, where we can automate some portion of the report, and then we can manually create the rest. So there's almost always going to be some portion of a report that we will have a manual touch towards. And so there's going to be a lot of this as a kind of hybrid approach. And as the QuickSight tool expands in its capabilities, we're going to be following right behind them. So there's always going to be a period where we will never be at 100% in terms of our assets as code, but we're going to be pretty close. So this is an example of some of the output of our BCA, or our BI content assessment. So what we'll do here is we take that content store, we completely deconstruct it, and then what we do is we build assets to help guide the rationalization process, meaning we'll build assets that show you of your reports, these are the ones that you used the past year. That's pretty easy. But we'll also show you've got 30 reports that are essentially redundant. They have all the same content. They're in 12 different business areas. Nobody has any idea that they exist in other business areas, and they probably all differ by one filter, right? And so there's essentially the same report. And do you need all these different versions, right? Because every single time you rebuild something, there's a cost to doing that during the migration. And can you build one instead of 15 or 17 or 30 of them, right? So we have these guides that help us work with the business to decide on what it is that we actually need to move over and what we need to spend time on. These guides go over incompatibilities between capabilities of Cognos and QuickSight. And then this is what leads to kind of our rough order of magnitude. That second phase, the optimization, is when we actually do the pruning. We actually will get rid of a lot of the content for you with input from a customer. And we develop what's called a cookbook. And you see an example that's a little bit blurry, but there's a lot of content there. But it tells you every data item, lineage, queries, expressions, all of that stuff, right? And so now that we have the documentation for every report, we're comfortable we're not going to lose anything. We can also use this documentation for our developers who are doing that hybrid or fully manual process of rebuilding that report. So we know that we're going to be accurate at the end of it when we're doing the migration. And then it also helps us figure out, once we've done a reduction and pruning with whatever subset of content is left, that is what we're going to do our estimate on. And then we're going to go and try as much as we can to do this with assets as coders, this automation piece. So if you imagine you've got 10,000 reports, if we can do automation and take care of maybe 60% of 10,000 reports, that's a huge time saver. Even if we still have to touch many of those in that hybrid approach, it's much better than having developers do all 10,000 manually. If you think about even setting up names and, analyses templates, and the amount of time it would take just to create folder structure for this, it's just a huge amount of time when you're talking about doing things at scale. So we always try to do this in an automated fashion at first. And the cost savings from doing it this way is just massive. So one thing that a lot of people forget about when they're doing migrations is, what do you do with your existing environment? So if you have a huge effort underway and you have people whose primary job it was to maintain the old environment, keep the lights on, continue to take requests and do things, what do you do with those people who are working towards the migration and going towards the future product, which is QuickSight? What do you do with the old environment? So we recognize that it's a huge maintenance issue to try to take care of two environments, old and new, at the same time. So we have a program through managed services to take care of your old environment, keep the lights on, take care of any sort of issues that are coming in, any support issues, maintain the environment, do upgrades, fix packs, and then also at the same time to take care of your license costs. So if you know you're on kind of a path to get off of Cognos or reduce Cognos, we can actually take your licenses and reduce your license costs as you're doing the migration. So a little bit of a summary. So what is it again? It's a framework and built-in accelerators for migration. Identifying what's valuable really helps with identification of the effort, documentation of your content, helping you develop a plan, and then automate as much as possible the creation of the new BI content. It's delivered in these three modules. Remember, if you start from the bottom and go up, and then our accelerators are our assessment, our rationalization, our cookbook, and this automated development, this assets as code. So that's it for AscentIQ. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions about the AscentIQ tooling or accelerators, how to get started in a migration, or even just want to talk about, the compatibility of old versus new functionality, give us a shout. We're at AscentIQ@ironsidegroup.com. That email address does go directly to me.